Maybe first.
Hello everyone, we will be getting started here in just a couple of minutes, but as you are joining, please go on ahead and send your name and organization that you represent in the chat. That way we can see who all is here. Thank you very much. All right, looks like it is 12 o'clock on the dot now, so we will go on ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining for our Ohio River discussion series for January. So just a few housekeeping things before we get started. Please, everyone, you're doing a great job, but make sure you keep your microphone muted and make sure that your camera is off just to help with the internet latency since we have a ton of people on here all at once. If you have any questions or comments, please use the chat. I will be monitoring that throughout just to make sure that all of your thoughts are getting to our awesome speakers today. And this will also be recorded, so just that way you're aware of that. And we did want to mention our upcoming discussion series over the next 2 months. We have, Adam, if you want to change the slide, thank you. We have our citizen science and outreach coming up in February, and our locks and dams in March. So stay tuned. We'll be sending out the official flyers with the descriptions for those, hopefully coming up in the next few weeks for February and next month for March. So keep in touch for that. So I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Chris Lorenz, who is going to be introducing our speakers for the day.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and thanks everyone for joining. I would also like to acknowledge and thank Dr. Harry Stone, who is the chairperson of the steering committee of ORBA, the Ohio River Basin Alliance, along with Orsenko, the Ohio River Recreation Trail, or the Foundation for Ohio River Education, and the National Park Services, who are sponsoring the Ohio River discussion series. I'd also like to thank and acknowledge Jen Bowman, who is the leader of our working group called Knowledge for Informed Decisions, and she spearheads this Ohio River discussion series as well, along with David Witz and the rest of her committee. So thank you all for that. My name is Chris Lorenz. I'm a professor of biological sciences at Thomas More University and the director of our biology field station, where we do a lot of ecological and environmental research on the Ohio River. And we like to promote the health of the river from the ecological perspective, right? So we want to have good ecosystem health and healthy organisms. But boy, when we can couple our arguments with other arguments such as the economic arguments, it's a much more powerful statement to carry on our work of preserving and protecting the Ohio River and other natural resources. And we have two fantastic speakers today to help us make those arguments from an economic perspective on the importance of preserving and protecting our natural resources. We have two speakers today, the first of whom is PJ Donovan with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. PJ serves as the chief for the Planning Center of Expertise for Inland Navigation and Risk-Informed Economics Division. This division has four technical elements: the Navigation Planning Center branch, the Data Management branch, the Review Management, and the Economic Consequences Production Center. These different branches have a technical staff element with primary responsibility for all inland water navigation economic studies. So a huge task for both the Ohio River and the Great Lakes. They also provide technical support for many related agencies. One of his branches acts as the review management organization for all Army Corps of Engineers inland navigation studies, coordinates internal quality control and assurance reviews of inland navigation economic studies, and supports the Army Corps of Engineers planning community of practice. Another branch is responsible for assessing the economic consequences of all dam and levee safety evaluations for the mapping, modeling, and consequence center. We look forward to hearing from PJ after our next speaker begins, and that is Dr. Brent Sanjan with the Ohio State University. Brent is a professor of environmental and natural resource economics in the Department of Agriculture, Environmental, and Development Economics at The Ohio State University. Brent received his doctorate in environmental and resource economics from Yale University in 1996. He conducts research on the economics of land use change and forestry, the design of incentive mechanisms for water and carbon trading, carbon sequestration, and the evaluation of environmental resources. Brent teaches courses on sustainability, the energy system, and the food system. So we are pleased to have both PJ and Brent, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Brent to begin. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Chris, for the fantastic and kind introduction. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody, especially PJ, who I got to meet here a little bit beforehand, and really looking forward to hearing what he has to say. So I wanted to just talk. I've got some slides here. I wanted to work through a sort of a study I've been engaged in with some colleagues, and I'll say colleagues in the best sense of the word, people who have collaborated together for really 2 to 3 years now on a project to value a river corridor in its recreational terms. It's the Little Miami River corridor. So it's been a really fun project. It's a great opportunity to chat a little bit about what we've been able to find so far and how we went about doing this. And hopefully it's of some use. Obviously, the Ohio River is substantially bigger than the Little Miami River, but hopefully some of the concepts and approaches we have here may be useful for application to a bigger corridor like the Ohio River. So our questions, the key questions we wanted to ask were, what is the outdoor recreation in the Little Miami River Valley worth? And we looked at this area that you can see on the map. I'm not the best mapper, so I just picked something, I'm sorry, out of Google Earth. And this is our points that we looked at. These are all points along the Little Miami River, along the corridor there. They can be either along the river or some of its tributaries. We're interested in asking how many people visit these natural spaces and entry points for the biking path and the multi-use path, as well as the river itself. What are all these folks up to? So that was our key question. How do we go about doing it? How do we go about trying to figure out what this area was worth? Well, we decided to sort of embark on a sampling procedure, I guess is probably the best word. And we decided to sample each parking location, and we developed a random stratified random sampling procedure for going to these parking locations like this one at Constitution Park, We counted the cars that we saw there, so we were very much at this point focused on people who are accessing this corridor via car, an automobile. We left a flyer on each car requesting individuals to fill out a short survey online. So the flyer had information on how they could access the survey, a little QR code so they could do it relatively easily with their smartphones. The survey was pretty short and just asked a few questions. We use that information to determine a lot of information about visitation and value. So what I want to talk about here is sort of what we learned about this, pretty small river segment. It's about 40 miles long, what we learned about this river segment. But first, before talking about that, to me, what's been the most gratifying experience of this entire process over the last couple of years has been the volunteers and the effort that volunteers put into helping us collect this. So all of the data that we collected here and all the information we collected was with a group of volunteers, 20 volunteers, over 20 people, 21 people who volunteered their time and gasoline to visit these 51 sites up to 3 times per week at randomly determined times over a period from April to October in 2021. So these are the names of the folks. I highlighted 3 in particular. Chris gets the biggest letters there because she just did amazing work in terms of organizing the volunteers and organizing people and then filling in when people couldn't make it on their sort of trips to the sites and locations during the time period of which there were lots of times when people couldn't make it, because they had trips or vacations or other things come up. So Chris just did amazing work for us, and Hope Taft and Bill Sheeman also filled in lots of times for lots of different people. A huge call out to Ryan Carper. We had two or three high school students. I don't think I've got all the other 2 students on here, but Ryan's a high school student down there and helped out a ton collecting data. And I mean, in order to do this right, you have to have people who are willing to show up there at these sort of, it's random times, but we're telling them when those random times are. Of course, those are determined in advance. So people have to be willing to do that. So it's really a big ask of people, and I just can't say enough for the help that these folks gave us over the time. They took 1,000 trips out there. Over 4,000 sites were visited. Obviously, they went to multiple sites on each trip. They spent over 1,000 hours surveying these locations, counted over 27,000 cars, and the average trip time was 58 minutes. So it's an enormous amount of sort of input labor from folks who gave that time and effort for free. And I can't be more thankful to them. This is really great stuff we got out of it, and hopefully it's useful to help make some good policy decisions for both this river corridor and other river corridors. So what do we find here? So we had 2,400 respondents. So out of the 27,000 cars that all got a flyer on them, we had 2,400 people respond to the online survey. Those people told us that about in each car, there were about 1.6 people per car, that they spent an average of about 2 hours per trip. The median age was around 50 to 52 years, and their expenditure on each of those trips was about $7.15 per trip. And that's in addition to gasoline. We asked them to just ignore the gasoline that they spent and only talk about the other things they spent money on. What were these kinds of activities were these folks engaged in, and how many of them were there in aggregate? So out of those 27,000 cars we observed, and out of the 2,400 respondents, we were able to statistically determine that on all these 51 sites, there are about 812,000 visitors, 813,000 visitors per year. The bulk of them, the biggest number of them, was in Yellow Springs. That's not surprising. That's a sort of a locus for people to get onto the Little Miami River Trail, but also there's some fantastic, obviously, natural areas around there. Xenia Station, another area, John Bryan State Park in the area got a lot of visitation. John Bryan's kind of broken into 3 different categories here. John Bryan, most of the parking lots are just here. There's 75,000 visitors per year. But the Clifton Gorge parking lots, which kind of allow you to access a relatively unique area, Clifton Gorge, there are about 45,000 folks going into that area through that location. And then the mountain bike trail is a little bit different, maybe 15,000 visitors there. So 812,000 is a huge number of visitors along this. And remember, this is just people actually accessing it at these locations and through cars. Obviously, there's other people accessing the river corridor either by bike, by walking in, or potentially by coming in from a distance if they happen to be riding the trail over long distances, of which we saw lots of people doing that during the course of this procedure of figuring out who was there. So this is an underestimate of the total visitation, but still represents an enormous number of people visiting this site. What were they doing? Biking was the biggest activity we found. 35% of the visitors were biking, 285,000 trips we estimate of biking. The other one was hiking. About 34% were hiking, hikers. This is different than walking their dogs. So around 280,000. The next biggest category was kind of other, at about 9%. And then running, jogging at 7%, and then a number of other activities in there. So huge number of activities, and we have this data for each of the different sites. So hopefully we'll be able to provide this information for people who are managing those sites to help them better understand what kinds of activities people are engaged in. To get to the valuation part, we wanted to measure the value of a trip. And what we're interested in is the value that the individuals get from taking those trips, not the money they leave. And certainly that's important, the money that they leave, the money they spend on stuff in stores or in other facilities near the recreational areas. That's certainly useful to have that information. And we know that it's about $7 per trip, as we said before. Well, what we're really interested in is the value those individuals take with them when they leave. And how do we measure that? We measure that in terms of the money they could have spent doing something else and the value of time they could have used doing something else. So we do figure that out based on where they came from, how they got there, what their income is, et cetera, et cetera. So we have pretty good information from these 2,400 people as a representative sample of the entire visiting population in terms of how much they value these sites. So when we use that, we're able to estimate something like this, which is the value of these different locations. And in this left-hand column, you can see sort of the value. This is the aggregate value of these locations in terms of what I'm going to call or refer to as consumer surplus. That's the value the individuals who took the trips got out of taking those trips. It's measured again in terms of the things they gave up to take those trips, the money they gave up, the time, and the time that they could have spent doing something else. So we estimate that value at about 9.7 million across all of those sites, about 9.7 million per year. And that's of course just between April and October, which is probably when the bulk of the trips are. And the value on a per trip basis of about $12.10 per trip. So a pretty significant value out of this sort of 40-mile stretch of the Little Miami River. We put that into sort of a per mile estimate. What we find is that there were about 20,000 visitors per mile. The visits were valued at $11 to $12 per trip on average. That value is greater than $9 million per year, and that sort of translates into somewhere around $225,000 per mile per year. Now, I went and looked up some of the costs of maintaining trails, maintaining parks like this. We can estimate those costs at anywhere at the cost of building. That's the capital cost at the beginning. It's not the annual costs or the sort of annualized average cost. Those would be a lot less than this 150,000 or to 300,000 per mile. So American Trails estimates that it costs on average for typical trails, kind of like you would have in this region, about 150,000 to 300,000. 300,000 would be really complicated stretches that would have lots of bridges and culverts and things like that. If you just have to do paving, the costs are actually less than 150,000. They're probably in the $70,000 to $80,000 per mile cost. So clearly, this having access to this area along the river is generating far more value than the cost of actually maintaining those areas. Pretty significantly more value on an annualized basis. Biking and hiking are the activities that are the most used in this region. So I just wanted to sort of put this out there. A huge thank you to some of my colleagues who helped collect this data, who are probably on the call here, I don't know, but Hope Taft, Chris Barnett, Abigail, a student at Ohio State, who's helping a ton on the analysis here, and Bill Sheeman. It took a lot of work to put this together, but we think we found something really unique and interesting. That stretch of river, which is a unique river, it's obviously a tributary to the Ohio River, is worth an enormous amount of money in terms of the recreation it provides locally to individuals who are able to use it. This suggests, if you were to do this and think of this on all those stretches of similar rivers along the Ohio River Basin, that there's just enormous value in the billions for sure in terms of the value of recreating in places like Little Miami River or the Ohio River Basin. So I'll stop there. I think you have to sort of take it back from me. But I'll stop there and turn it over to PJ and then look forward to some discussion.
Thanks a lot, Brent. And yes, PJ is going to go next. And then audience, you can type your questions in the chat and we're going to address the questions after PJ speaks.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. First, let me say it's my pleasure and honor to be speaking with everybody today, and it is a bit humbling when I look at the names that are out there on this call today. Thank you for taking the time out of your day. Chris, thank you for the introduction. I kept thinking, who is this guy he's talking about? Here we go. Let's talk about Inland Navigation Economics 101. So basically, my goal here today is kind of keep this at a high level. A lot of stuff goes into this analysis that my center engages in. So we'll step through these slides. I have slides in front of me. I didn't share them with the deck. So we'll keep this conversational. Whoever's in charge of muting, please make sure we're all muted so I don't get any feedback. But other than that, let's rock and roll through this and talk some things. So Inland Navigation Economics 101. It's something we do here in the Army Corps of Engineers. It's unique to our process. It's the economic frameworks are basically the supply and demand of the modeling, right? It's a modeling effort with the supply and the demand. And then the output, of course, of that is the cost benefit analysis. That's that investment justification that we inform our senior leaders in Congress on where your tax dollars should be spent to improve the inland navigation system across the United States. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the why and the how we as the Army Corps of Engineers engage in this activity. A little bit of why is the historical context, and then of course the how is kind of explain what we do, because it is unique what we do. It is a unique process that has been peer reviewed and for years. So we're just going to keep moving. With that said, if my slide deck would keep up with me. So why? Core economics guidance. The why is the Flood Control Act of 1936. The Flood Control Act of 1936. We go back that far doing economic analysis of locks and dams. And then in 1950, a green book. We call it the green book because literally it's green. Welcome to the Army. It's the purpose and practices for economic analysis of river basin projects. That was introduced to Congress. And that is kind of the how we've been going on. Of course, we've improved that process. In 1970, the Office of the Chief of Engineers, System of Locks and Dams, now requires a system analysis. So we started out doing project individual analysis. And then in the 1970s, we start seeing this need to do more of a system analysis, right? Looking at the investment justification across systems. And then in 1973, to help support that effort, we published principles and standards. In 1983, those principles and guidelines were updated. And then in 2000, 20 years ago, the Plan and Guidance Notebook was published. And that's kind of our guiding body that we go to when we do the plan formulation for these projects. So there's kind of the why. We're going to talk a little bit about the how here in a second. For some reason, my notes, there we go. So let's talk a little bit about the supply-demand framework for just a second. In the demand is based on lock traffic, right? That is the products and the commodities and the vessels that are moving up and down the system. That's the demand. We look at rates, right? We look at the rates that are charged by shippers. And then, of course, we look at that shipper response. That shipper response is part of the demand we address in our analysis. So let's think about this. If we look at the Upper Ohio River system, and let's say there's a new fracking plant that's coming online, right? We got a new fracking plant that opens, and that's going to shift the demand curve to the right. And then we look at the consequences of that as well, that higher transportation costs due to higher delays, right? So we're increasing that demand at our product. Our product is the chamber. And there's a consequence associated with that, right? We got that increased traffic. So we want to think about that and look at that issue. And so as we look at that supply demand is that lock capacity and reliability, right? That demand framework is that capacity at that lock chamber. And then that reliability. So when we talk about lock chamber, let's just kind of take a second here. lock chamber capacity is really the size of that chamber, right? How big is that lock chamber? Is it a 385-foot chamber long? Is it a 600-foot chamber? Is it a 1,200-foot chamber? These are some of that lock capacity issues we look at. And then we look at that reliability, that risk-informed component. How reliable is this chamber to the shippers, right? Is that service going to be available when they need it, right? When they come downstream, is that service going to be reliable? That locking service. So once again, what are the benefits we want to talk about? So as we lean into this conversation, think about benefits, supply, demand, benefits. That is that tonnage, that savings per ton that is moved on the waterway. A lot of you hear me talk about that transportation rate savings, right? That is what the benefit is that our projects provide the nation as compared to overland capacity, be it railroad, be it trucking. It's that savings per ton to move that same commodity over our system. So once again, when that demand curve shifts and supply demand to the right and that supply curve shifts to the left, then we start seeing the cost per ton of barge transportation increase, which reduces the savings per ton, right? So it's a unique dynamic we see on the inland waterway. And we attempt to analyze that and address these supply and demand issues and optimize that size of that chamber as we do through this. So cost, right? What are the costs that we use that go into this economic analysis? Well, of course, being the Army Corps of Engineers, cost is defined by a Civil Works policy memo, which was dated 25 August 2011. We codified the costs we capture in our analysis. Okay, so cost is basically the money to operate, maintain, and improve the navigation system over this planning horizon, this life cycle. One thing unique about the Army Corps of Engineers as we look at this planning horizon is that it is a 50-year planning horizon. We analyze for 50 years. So with that said, we look at project first cost. So these are the first costs, these are the first analysis of the construction cost that go into the project. Then we do the total investment cost, which is the project first cost plus interest during construction, right? Because these projects take a long time to construct. And then there's an average annual cost that we address as well. So we look at the cost as it's defined. Those are the costs that goes into our analysis with the project. So with that said, we put it all together, right? We do the cost benefit analysis, a conceptual framework used to compare with and without project conditions. And then we're going to talk a little bit about with and without project conditions here in a second. So what is this without project condition? Well, there are several possibilities, and sometimes these without project conditions do change. It's the current and future situation of the system, and if it is maintained with normal operation and maintenance funds, and failures are fixed as they occur. Because once again, during that failure, if the lock and dam fails, that supply curve shifts. It shifts to the left, which then drives up that transportation cost. Like shippers are then delayed at our project. That costs the economy money. And then we replace unreliable components before failure. We call that advanced maintenance. You'll hear those terms used quite a bit. So what is this with project condition? Well, there's several possibilities with project conditions. Right now, in our current operating environment, what we're seeing coming out of Office of Management and Budget is major rehabs. This is to make investment before the failure occurs in an attempt to improve the reliability with no enlargement of the locks, right? We're not shifting that supply curve to the right. Basically, we're improving the reliability of the existing project to ensure the serviceability when the shipper arrives at our project. Now, we do engage in new lock investment, make an investment before the failure to improve reliability with where we make the locks larger. And that does, of course, shift that supply curve to the right. So you heard me say earlier, 385-foot chambers, 600-foot chambers, 1,200-foot chambers. Well, that's what we're talking about here. That's expanding that capacity, taking, say, an old 385-foot chamber and moving that chamber to a 600-foot or 1,200-foot, and analyzing that investment. So we look at that and see how that impacts some of the investment justifications. So with that said, I think I got a few minutes. I'm going to step into a case study that we recently completed. It's the Upper Ohio Navigation Study. It's the Montgomery Lock and Dam, the Shields Lock and Dam, and Emsworth Lock and Dam. These are all in the Pittsburgh pool, just downstream from Pittsburgh. So we'll kind of at a high level step you through some of the processes we went through to make the investment justifications we did. This economic analysis started at around 2017, 2016, 2017. We by policy, we have up to 3 years to finish a study like this. We pulled that study schedule to the left, and we completed this study effort in about 18 months using risk-informed decision-making. So here's some problems and opportunities for the Upper Ohio Navigation Study, those 3 locks and dams that I highlighted earlier. So what are some of these navigation opportunities we analyzed? We wanted to improve the structural integrity of locks and dams. We wanted to enhance that reliability of that service we provide, and we wanted to increase that auxiliary capacity, right? You got to have that capacity in the system. So some of the measures, right? Some of the measures we looked at, what were we going to do? So in our plan formulation, we looked at replacing facilities, new replacement facilities, 3 for 3. Fewer facilities, can we do 2 facilities for 3? Pull 1 out of service, right? And just have 2 locks and dams. 1 new lock chamber per facility, 2 new lock chambers per facility. Advanced maintenance, as I talked about earlier. Maybe a major rehab was in order. And then low-cost features to improve the efficiency. So we're screening all these measures in our plan formulation process as part of our investment justification. Sorry, I got a little tongue-tied there. So one of the most important things, not one of the most, but one of the things we really use is forecasting, right? You heard me talk about rates, those transportation rates we do an analysis on. We also use forecasting, right? When you're engaged in a 50-year, when you're used in a 50-year planning horizon, we're using a forecast. So we're forecasting out 50 years, which can be a challenge. So we see at these lock projects, we saw a peak in traffic of about 1970 was right around 25 million tons. And then of course, in 2010, we saw a significant reduction, that's post-recession. And then we saw some rebounding. And the baseline traffic forecast is around 20 million tons annually. So what's moving through these locks and dams in the Ohio River Pool? Coal and coke, no surprise, right? One of the largest coking plants left in North America sits in these pools of navigation. Petroleum fuels, crude petroleum, we're seeing aggregates, we're seeing chemicals, we're seeing ores and minerals, we're seeing iron and steel. And then of course we see other products as well. We just kind of put that together. We're pulling this data, of course, from lock performance monitoring systems, and then the navigation investment model, and then the waterborne commerce statistical data set. So a lot of commodities mixed. We're looking at analysis of about 20 million tons annually moving through that product. Plan formulation, we move into it without project condition, baseline. We look at the NEPA issues and a no action alternative. So basically that's just the status quo on these products, right? These projects, 3 structural deficient lock facilities. So we kind of checked off some things, maintenance, routine, cyclical, and reactive, no major component replacement, no major rehabilitation, high and increasing probability of structure failure, a lot of at risk at these projects, progressive deterioration, significant consequences. We're looking potentially at multi-year closures and potential loss of navigational pool. So that's if we don't do anything, what we could be looking at on this system. So then we go into the plan formulation and we do with project conditions, right? And we look at these navigation measures I spoke of. So some of the things we measured, all right, and we screened out. replace locks and dams, all new 3 for 3. We screened out, remove 1 lock and 2 for 3. We screened out adding a 3rd lock, retain existing, and we screened out the major rehab. But what we moved forward on was advanced maintenance and new lock construction at existing locations. So we're improving reliability, we're improving the reliability of the facility, but we're also adding new capacity, right? We're improving it. And so when we did our analysis in 18 months, we came back and the recommended plan, the NED plan, basically was construct 3 new lock chambers, 110 by 600 foot, which would remove existing auxiliary river chambers, retain existing lane chambers, and then this priced out at about $2.3 billion of federal investment into this infrastructure to ensure safe, reliable, and efficient and sustainable navigation on the Upper Ohio River. So we believe that was our course of action. That was indeed the NED recommended plan. That is indeed the investment justification that moved forward through Congress, and we are seeing that effort moving out today. So I went fast. I was at a real high level of discussion. I think I made it within 20 minutes. So hopefully we're in good shape to do some question and answers. I do apologize that I did not have a slide deck today for viewing. With that said, I'm going to turn it back to Chris and see what's next. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, PJ. Thank you, Brent. It's really impressive work, and it just is so important that what you do in terms of taking those economic impacts into account. And there's lots of questions, lots of interest generated from your talks, and I was particularly impressed on just the value of the Little Miami corridor and how it outweighs the cost, and hopefully that sends a message throughout the basin. One question that I had for Brent real quick, and that is, when you do these types of studies, is it the level of confidence, the estimates and things like that, do you feel like this would be a conservative numbers that you presented, or do you feel as if you had a pretty good grasp of the economics of that example?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Chris. It's an excellent estimate, in my opinion, of what we went out to measure, which was the recreational value of the individuals who accessed the river at those points. What we do know is that people access the rivers and also via car. So what we do know is people access the river other ways, right? There are a bunch of people who use the Little Miami River canoe liveries, and we don't have those estimates in there yet. We will ultimately value those, but we haven't done that yet. There's people who are biking through there. There's a great number of them actually who are biking through the area, and we're not actually calculating their value either. So there's a lot that we're missing. So in terms of what we sought to measure, I think this is a really good estimate of it. And based on the sampling design, we had people at these sites so many times, so we have a really good knowledge of how many times and how much visitation there was at these particular sites. So yeah, I think we did pretty good on that, but it does miss a lot. So it's an underestimate of the overall value for sure.
Yeah, excellent. And yet it still makes a strong, powerful argument, as you mentioned, so which is great to see. And PJ, certainly navigation is first and foremost in your analyses as well as flood control. Can you talk about, real quick, some of the other aspects of inland navigation that the Corps has on its radar when it does a economic analysis, if there are any other factors?
Oh, yeah, Chris, that's a great thing. And part of the reason I showed the history, now that I'm kind of off script, let's have some fun. Now that, one of the reasons I showed that history is when you look at it, our policies are about 20 years old. And we're really focused on that NED, that National Economic Development Benefit, that transportation rate system we provide the nation. However, like Paul Harvey says, I don't think we're telling the rest of the story, right? There's this RED, there's this regional economic development component that exists because of the pools of navigation that our infrastructure creates, right? Water supplies, clean drinking water supplies, recreational benefits, bank stabilization, There's all sorts of things that go into this discussion. So yes, we are having this conversation. We are looking at how do we do a better job of incorporating that RED, that regional economic development component into the NED, into the discussion. Let's put it that way. You know, you can't combine NED and RED into one analysis, but what you can do is do a better job of telling that story so that decision makers fully understand that, yeah, the NED of the project may be one. However, let's all go back and look at this and let's really think about all the RED that's existing in that pool of navigation and inform the decision maker of that and do a good job of telling that story. So, you know, Brent bringing forth this recreational value component to the discussion is critical. You know, we count swings on the lock chamber. We count recreational boats that go through, motorboats, power boats. So we see that, we count that, but we don't really do a good job of telling that RED story. What is really the true value that recreational component brings that our pools of navigation creates opportunity for? So it's a great conversation. We're having it as an agency, and more to come on that, Chris.
Yeah, and it's refreshing that you guys are taking that broader scope and just giving it a closer look and really expanding your possibilities. As a reminder, as Nick mentioned, go ahead and type your question in the chat, please, and Nick will help narrate those questions to the presenters. And one I noticed in the chat, Brett, was who are the beneficiaries of your study, or where does that study go from you to others? Are there politicians, elected officials interested in that, tourism boards? Who are the folks who can really benefit from the work that you've done?
Well, yeah, you know, first off, recognize that the benefits are to the individuals who are doing the visiting. So this this represents, gain to people like you and me from having access to those sites. And so this is the people we would anticipate would want to use this are the people who make decisions about investing in existing recreational infrastructure, so parks, any park boards, metropolitan park boards, the people who manage the bike path as well as the other natural areas along there would be able to use this information, hopefully argue for more resources. I'll just say, in Ohio we have fantastic state parks. The state parks are incredible, but we underinvest in our state parks and the infrastructure for people to get access to those. And this data can show pretty clearly that a place like John Bryan is way underinvested in by the state. And that would also exist for other natural areas that aren't state parks that are run by local counties or municipalities. So that's the kind of folks who I think could use this information to say, we have people who value this stuff and they're taxpayers. They deserve to get the benefits that they're willing to pay to see this kind of recreational opportunity exist. So those are the kind of folks we would imagine. And it needs to be said that this doesn't exist if not for a relatively natural waterway, right? So you don't have this without a natural waterway there. I'm nothing against dams and whatnot, but this is not a place where we want to put new dams, right? This is a place where we want to keep dams off of.
Right.
But the reason why it has such high value is because of that. It's the existing situation. My guess would be that in lots of places along the Ohio River, given the historic nature of many of the dams, that you'd be able to show recreational value in some of those areas of being extremely high, and that you'd actually want to preserve those specifically because people are getting incredible value out of those. There's a huge balance here, obviously, we have to create or maintain. So these same methods could be used to show that in places where we have other infrastructure, such as infrastructure we built, that we actually do want to maintain it. So these methods can be applied to lots of places. It just so happens here that the reason why we get such high value is because of the incredible natural asset that it is.
So
Thank you.
Brent, it's PJ. Brent, I'd like to add one more thought to your comments there, and I believe they are spot on. Balance is critical to how we look at the system and how we look at the environment in general we operate in. But I would like you to take your thinking one step farther. If you look at the Army Corps of Engineers, we're a huge recreational provider, right? I talked about the industrial side of it today with the locks and dams and industry and all that. But at the end of the day, our flood risk management projects provide tremendous recreational opportunities throughout our region. And being able to take your processes and understand that maybe a little better at our locks and at our flood risk management projects, our lakes that we all like to recreate on, would be a great way too. So don't stop your thinking with just state and local. Let's keep that thinking at a federal level as well. I think would love to have these conversations move forward.
Hey, Brent, Tally was extremely impressed with your survey results. Can you share? She wanted to know if you had any, if you could share, like, how did you administer that survey? How did they access the questions? Just the return rate on your surveys was tremendous.
Yeah, so I saw that that question. Actually, there were 27,000 cars, so it was 2,400 people. So it was really probably a little less than 10% response rate, but that's actually pretty standard now with most of the surveys we're doing. We're seeing, somewhere between 8 and 12% response rates, and so we feel pretty good about that. And it was really, so what happened, we put flyers, they were paper flyers on people's cars, and they basically had a QR code, so you could just use your phone. And the survey itself, we think it took us a little while to get the design correct, but we think ultimately we had a pretty good design where people could easily go on there and answer the questions that we asked. Out of 2,400 responses, we used about 2,100 of them. There were like 300 or so of them that weren't, where they didn't fully answer all the questions, or they didn't answer the key questions, which were the amount of time that they spent on site and the number of people they came with. So, but still we felt really good about it, given what we know is happening with survey research like this, which is that response rates are dramatically declining. So we were within the ballpark of where everyone else is, and we feel pretty good about it, at least from that perspective. But yeah, it was 2,400 responses out of 27,000, so it wasn't quite the really huge response rate.
Yeah, but it's still very good and typical, and I'm sure it served a purpose, right? Those 2,400 was more than enough you needed to make the conclusions you did. And I'm going to turn it over to Nick. Nick has been compiling a lot of the questions, and if Nick, you don't mind asking a few more?
Absolutely. So just a clarification real quick, Brent. There was just another question that came through asking about that 2,400 number. Was it unique visitors, or were you counting visits, not specific visitors?
Yeah, so each one of those was a unique individual who got a survey, who got something on their card, or they might have been handed it. So one of our enumerators, they could have handed it to someone if they happen to be talking to someone there at the park and not put it on the card. But so what we were doing is trying to get a random response of people who got those flyers and match those up to the cars. Now, we've done a lot of analysis across the sites and across the locations and across the season as well. And it looks like we did get a pretty random response of people. So people went in and responded to that approximately randomly across all the locations, at about an 8% clip across all the locations and across the seasons as well. We did ask people who had already taken it to, because obviously there's going to be multiple people who will show up to the same site on multiple times, and they're going to get just by chance get a survey twice. We asked them to respond to us. So we do have some people who did that, and we do have knowledge of how many times we were oversampling, or I should say sampling people twice. That did happen, but we try to deduct that from our procedures in terms of counting people up. So yeah, we try to account for a lot of that, but it looks pretty random and it looked pretty good. Obviously, our report will have a lot more of those statistics in it when we get that done in the next month or so.
Awesome. Thanks for that clarification. So the next question is going to be towards PJ. Do you have an estimate of the recreational impact on the USACE lakes in the Ohio River Basin?
So interestingly, our recreational program is in our operations and maintenance division. So our operation and maintenance division, or ops as we call them across the districts, do maintain visitor counts at the projects across the region. So with that said, we have campgrounds, of course, which that's the most, the best data, right? Because you can people in and out of a campground. And then, of course, as you move down, boat launches are, if people aren't paying their $5 fee at the boat launch, then we're really not probably getting a good head count unless a ranger is out there actually physically one day counting the number of boats that are launched or the number of kayaks or SUPs that are launched at that boat launch. So we have estimates on that side of the house, much better data associated with the campgrounds. But yes, East District across the division does indeed have those visitor counts.
Thank you. So I'll just keep bouncing back and forth between questions for each of you to keep both of you on your toes. So Brent, what would it cost to do a similar assessment that you did for the Great Miami, but for the entire Ohio River Basin?
That's a great question. It would probably for the entire basin, we would do it a slightly different way, actually. So it would be a different type of a study because there's just so many locations and access points. And so to that point, I'll just mention that Ohio Department of Natural Resources is funding research that I'm doing with the School of Environment and Natural Resources, School of Environment and Natural Resources at Ohio State right now on evaluation of recreational fishery in the state of Ohio. So we're surveying anglers at the moment in the state and specifically learning about their trips across the state, but in the Ohio River Basin in particular as well. So I would tackle it kind of differently. I would go after the recreational segments differently. So I would go after the anglers through boating or fishing licenses, the boaters through boating licenses, because you can do now sampling via the internet relatively cheaply. So it wouldn't be hugely expensive. The difficulty there is a little bit of time and resources to collect the data from the various states along the river because all those are state databases, but usually they're public databases and states are, Ohio is super helpful in terms of helping us get access to the data. So, I don't know what the exact price is, but it wouldn't be the, time cost of this one times thousands because of the area, because I wouldn't do it the same way for the whole basin.
That makes
Brent,
a lot
do you
of
think,
sense.
yeah, sorry to interrupt, Nick. Brent, do you think you could outline your thoughts that you just expressed to provide for Orba? Because as we move forward, this is something we'll look for opportunities for folks to help us out with. Is that something that you're willing to do? No hurry, but just kind of outline your thoughts on how we might go about doing an analysis for the entire basin, because it does seem really daunting.
Yeah, no, for sure. For sure. We can do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that would definitely be good for helping scale up Orba efforts here in the next year or so. So the next question for PJ, could you talk about the future considerations of the recreation impact or the impact of waterfront development by the Corps?
All right, so let's take a moment here. So future impacts. So currently underway at the headquarters level for the Army Corps of Engineers is we are addressing the policy memos associated with economic analysis and benefit updates. So we are addressing these, looking at how once again how do you incorporate these benefits? Well, let's just start basically. How do you define the benefits that we want to calculate in the analysis for RED? So we are really kind of just at that stage. We have existing policy that talks about what the recreational benefits we currently capture, as I alluded to earlier, but it's greater than that. There's much more significant benefits out there that I believe we are leaving on the table when we put together our reports, and our reports go up the vertical chain to inform decision makers who are going to make these investment justifications. So yes, the short answer is yes, we are looking at these issues. But once again, I work for the Army Corps of Engineers, and we take time. We're very deliberate in our processes. So as to when we will see the outcome of these efforts, I wish I could tell you, but I can't today. My apologies.
And then a follow-up to that. When we are talking about recreational, do you mind defining that? The full question was, what all is included in your definition of recreational? Would it include, as an example, riverfront concerts and festivals?
At this time, no. No. Uh, they are not included in the analysis when we look at recreational. When we look at RED, we do look at jobs, right? We do talk jobs, RED, and tying those back to the industrial waterway. When we look at recreation, we use recreation, and as I said earlier, it's about the what's actually moving through our locks and dams. We record every vessel movement through the locks and dams to include power boats, and yes, some locks and dams you can kayak through. We do include that data, but much greater than that, no, we don't get into that deep into the data analysis at this point, and that's part of the policy discussion and part of what are we calculating, what should we be looking at. As I said earlier, one of the most significant things are water intakes that our pool navigations create. And the other, of course, is this recreational component. And when you get into recreational component beyond just what powerboat goes across our lock and dam, then you get into these issues like, oh, wait a minute, people are recreating at a concert, recreational waterfront development. Look, it can get big. And so it's, as I said, the Army Corps of Engineers, we're very deliberate in our processes. We're very deliberate in what we calculate. So we'll continue the conversations at a national level. And in time, hopefully we'll have something we can share with a larger audience.
Cool. Thanks for that definition. And then Brent, some more clarifying questions about your study, your design. Were there any privacy concerns or restrictions in the survey of visitors?
Yeah, one quick comment on that with respect to the last question or point on the valuing of things like concerts and other stuff on the riverfronts. So from an environmental economist standpoint, typically those concerts have immense value actually, but the immense value is the benefit of the music itself and the experience itself, which can be had at lots of different places. So one of the reasons why, so for example, environmental economists like myself focus on recreation is because, the benefits are, because of the recreation, the outdoor recreation at that particular location, because of the amenities of that location. It turns out that the amenities of a concert have more to do with the concert, with the group that people want to go see, more so than the actual location. So, most big groups these days sell out at most locations, pretty much wherever that location is, suggesting that the location actually doesn't matter. What matters is the group itself. So for instance, I wouldn't actually worry about concerts and things like that as a measure of the value of an outdoor amenity. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. But I really focus on the outdoor recreational things because most of the value is for the people who are doing the recreation there. And to the other question in terms of privacy concerns, because of the way we did the survey, there were of course issues with that. We had to be very careful. We have human subjects issues at Ohio State where we have to sort of carefully go through. So we did pay attention to all of that. But with the way we designed it, we really carefully kind of maneuvered around those and didn't have privacy concerns because we were not taking people's private information really at any time. We did ask them for emails if they wanted to have a follow-up survey. We did do a follow-up survey that we haven't fully analyzed yet. But that was people who self-identified. Otherwise, they didn't have to self-identify, and we literally just got information from people who went on there. They didn't have to provide any of that information. It turns out most people actually did provide that private information, and they'll get a copy of our survey ultimately, or our results ultimately. But that was, we used fairly careful procedures and protocols to make sure we weren't invading people's space or private space that way.
And then just to continue following up with your study, this you kind of started to get at this previously with what it would look like if you scaled up to a river basin level. But if money were no object, how would you design the study?
Well, we're starting to experiment with different approaches. So the key is if you want to understand the amount of people participating in the natural areas, the issue there is that the natural areas are pretty diffuse across a large space. So you have to figure out how to actually count at some statistical approach the number of people participating, and then you have to, the second part of it is figure out how to collect a little bit more information about those people so you can identify the value of their recreation, and so you then can aggregate up your statistical estimates. So there's good new technologies coming out with respect to trail counters and things like that, which can be done without individual labor. I mean, labor is the biggest thing, obviously. If you have to send people out there, that's costly in time and energy and money to do that. So that's the one thing to navigate. There's a way to design it to do that for a whole basin like this. It might be relatively expensive. It probably would be in the 800,000 to $1 million range, potentially do the entire Ohio River basin just because it's so huge. But I mean, people have done it. For instance, the techniques we're using are the same ones that have been used to estimate the value of beaches across the U.S. We did the same thing in Lake Erie beaches as well. In Lake Erie beaches, we used people in southern beaches in Florida, and it's the entire state of Florida, which is kind of about the same size, maybe a little smaller than the Ohio River basin. But they used flyovers and counted people with flyovers. So that was relatively expensive. It can be done. It's just it does get more expensive as you scale up in size.
Thank you, Brent. And go ahead, Nick.
Oh, sorry. I did want to just comment real quick. There was a question of whether or not the session would be available for future review. I just wanted to answer that to everyone real quick. This session was recorded, so it will be posted. David Wicks, remind me where it will be posted.
David might get back to us on that, but as we're at the 1 o'clock hour, I just want to offer the opportunity for PJ and Brent to offer any closing comments as ORBA or Sanko, the Ohio River Recreation Trail, moves forward in helping us develop this economic argument.
Well, yeah, I can jump in there. I mean, beyond what I've already said, I think that there's huge value there. The U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis is valuing recreation to the economy. It's huge in the U.S. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has massive impact on that with the dams that they have and the resources that they provide. We're just sort of starting to learn what this value is and make sure that we can develop the policies that can support that and make sure that people can access it. I mean, that's the big thing for me is figure out ways that people can access it, access to outdoor amenities that provide so much to them. So it's exciting for me to help out in any way I can to support you guys and what you're doing. I'd love to do that. So just let me know if there's anything else I can do to help out.
Thank you very much. PJ, you want to finish us off?
Yeah, so first, groups like this are fantastic to be a part of. As everyone on the call knows, as a federal employee, I'm not allowed to lobby. And so having public engagement like we're having today, where we can share ideas and talk about things, and once again, using data, this data we're collecting via Brent or data that we're collecting here in the Army Corps of Engineers, that's public-facing data that everybody has access to inform decision makers of the critical nature, not only for industrialization purposes and industrial transportation, but also recreational components and health benefits of our system. We need to do it. And so speaking with a balanced one voice like we are across the basin is just, like I said, it's humbling to me that I'm a part of this. So thank you for allowing me to ramble on a little bit today about some technical matters, and then of course talk a little bit about some things we're looking forward to in the future. Thank you.
No, thank you both. It was really interesting, informative, and educational for me, and I'm sure a lot of others, and you have generated a lot of interest. We'll likely be following up with both of you. I also want to thank Nick Callahan and Adam Scott with Orsenko for managing all of the logistics, and Jen Bowman at the Voinovich School at Ohio University for leading the Knowledge for Informed Decisions working group of ORBA, because that's what these two guys do, is develop data that's going to inform our decision-making, policies, et cetera, moving forward. And we want to put a plug in again for the February discussion series on citizen science and outreach, and then there'll be another one in March on the old locks and dams and how we can utilize those to their biggest potential, whether it's recreation, education, tourism, et cetera. So once again, thank you all for joining us. And the session will be put on the Ohio River Recreation Trail website, and I'm sure our organizers can email you that information moving forward. So thanks again, take care, and we'll see you later.
Okay, thanks, Chris. It was great to meet you again.
Yeah, Bryan, thanks, and I hope to see you in person when I'm up in Columbus. I got a few colleagues that work on mussels up there, and I'll have to track you down.
Oh, it sounds good, Trevor. Okay, let me know.
Great.
And PJ, if you're still on, good to meet you.